Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Fargo Public Library event. Tonight we have Jack Zaleski presenting on his book, Forum Communications Company, A Narrative History, 1980 to 2018. We are streaming this event on Facebook Live, and we also have an in-person audience, so welcome all of you. And we will also have a link to the recording of this event available tomorrow for those who couldn't make it, or if you enjoyed it and want to share it with somebody else. Also, at the end of Jack's presentation, I'll have a microphone and we can go around. You guys have questions that you would like to ask of him. And then we will also have people on Facebook, if they want to comment, they can do so, put a question in the comments, and then we'll ask Jack those questions as well. So the book that I'm holding tells a compelling business story, a fascinating account of a family's dedication, and a commitment to excellence. While the book focuses on the years of 1980 through 2018, the foundational values that defined Forum Communication Company from its beginnings in Dakota Territory more than 140 years ago are apparent still in its vision and service to Fargo and the state of North Dakota. Jack Zaleski is an award-winning journalist who retired in 2017 after 30 years as editorial page editor of the Forum of Fargo-Moorhead. Jack is a member of the North Dakota Newspaper Association 50-Year Club and a former member of the National Conference of Editorial Writers and the NCEW Foundation's Board of Directors. His honors include 2 first-place Herman Rowe Editorial Writing Awards from the Minnesota Newspaper Association and several top honors from the North Dakota Newspaper Association. He is a native of New Britain, Connecticut, and attended the University of Connecticut at Storrs. He is a member of the advisory board of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute at NDSU. He and his wife, Sandy, who grew up north of Sentinel Butte, North Dakota, divide their time between North Dakota and Vermont. Jack, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody get a seat? First of all, I want to thank the library for hosting this. This is one of the things the Fargo Public Library does so well. If you pay attention to the library's programs or use the library as often as Sandy and I do, especially the South Branch, the Carlson, you understand, you realize what a treasure we have in the Fargo library system. It is outstanding. It really is outstanding. So I want to thank the library for hosting this, and also the city for allowing us to use this spectacular City Commission meeting room. Those of you in Fargo and elsewhere who haven't seen it should visit. This is a beautiful place, and kind of a tribute to the confidence I think that Fargo citizens have in their municipal government, that they're willing to spend the kind of money it took to have this place. Now, it's always good to see you here this evening. I know most of you, in one way or another, the people that are connected with media that are here, a lot of people who whose stories contributed to what's in the book, and so it's good to see them here. The book, the genesis of the book, really goes back to 2008, a little bit before 2008, when Bill Marsill Sr., who at that time was publisher of the Forum, has since retired and now is chairman of the board of Forum Communications Company, talked with the late Terry Devine and me about writing a new history of the Forum. Terry, as you know, was a respected journalist at the Forum for many years, died in 2008. The project sort of dropped, and we didn't do it. When I retired, or announced that I was going to retire in 2017, Bill came to me and said, "You still want to consider doing a new history of the Forum?" And I said, "Sure." And so we put a package together, a program together, and I accepted the commission and went to work. Had Terry Devine lived, he would have been co-author of this thing, which would have been fun to work with him. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. So I went to work in 2017, researched and worked and wrote and rewrote and all those things for more than 2 years. And the book was ready to be rolled out. We had it done, completed. It had been to the bindery. They were all back in Fargo. And the pandemic came along. And so everything got put on hold. We did a rollout anyway, a virtual rollout anyway. I think it was in April of 2020, and had 90 people participate in that. And we wanted to get it out before the Thanksgiving and Christmas season. And that was a good thing to do. Of the 500 books we had printed, there are only about 120 left. So it is your job tonight to buy the 120 that are left and use them for what you will. So as was said, I was with the Forum for 30 years. And that 30 years represents almost 1/3 of the time that the Black and Marcil families have owned the paper at the time. Right now, the paper has been in local ownership, the same family, for 105 years. And that represents 5 generations, and there is a 6th generation being prepared. So it looks like the future of the Forum as a family-owned, locally rooted institution is sound for at least another generation, and who knows. But it's a remarkable story in that the first Black, Norman B. Black, who actually got some of his newspaper training in Grand Forks, and saw an opportunity and came down here and scraped the money together to buy the Forum in 1917. And he bought it for $100,000, which these days translates into something like, oh, I don't know, $1 million something. I forget the numbers in the book. And so he took a risk, and it was a smart one. And since then, it's been in the family. The paper itself has been published since, as a daily newspaper since 1878, continuously published under different names. The original Argus, the Fargo Argus, was one of the precursors. Those early papers, the Argus, the Republican, some others that have disappeared, their names have disappeared, were folded into what became the Forum. And so the Forum traces its roots to 1878, before statehood, several years before statehood. It's a fascinating story. What I want to do before we discuss the book a little more is I want to read a couple of excerpts from the book that sort of set the tone for what it was. Before I do that, I want to mention that the 1978 book was written by a professor of journalism at Morehead State. Her name was Melva Moline. Some of you people might have known her. She was a scholar and a good teacher. She's still alive, living in California, I believe. A copy of her book is on the back table there with those historic front pages. And if you're familiar with that book, and I know some of you are because you've been part of the Forum for a long time, the book was her PhD thesis, and she took the thesis and rewrote it into book form. And it's a great resource. I mean, the research that she did on the early years of the Forum was really helpful for me when I did my research on the one chapter that talks about the older years, the first years of the Forum. But the book itself, if you read it, reads like an academic thesis. And the publisher, who was Bill Marcil at the time, who commissioned that book in 1978, never liked it. There's no secret about that. He never liked it. And he said when he was having a tough day and he needed to go to sleep, he'd pick up Melva's book and it would put him to sleep. So, and this is a guy who knew the history of the company. No, I mean, but the book, is not a compelling read, but it's a wonderful resource. And so if you have a chance, there's still a few of them around. We have some in the library, in the archive, in the Forum. It really is a good resource for the very early years of the Forum and Fargo up until 1978. This book picks up in the mid-70s with the chapter that goes into the purchase and the early history, goes to the 1970s and goes to about the present day. However, not to the present day where print has almost disappeared. That all happened after this was published. That would have been a separate chapter in itself. Although the last chapter of this book alludes to that kind of situation developing, and that the future was, a very cloudy crystal ball. It's getting a little sharper now, and those of us who are, have printer's ink in our veins don't like it, but it's the reality of the day. And so we come along at a historic time, but at a bittersweet time. The business has changed so much. The business model has changed so much because of technology and other reasons. And so what we have always cherished as, that inky newspaper with coffee in the morning, digging it out of the snowbank and cursing the delivery kid, calling the paper, "Where the hell's my paper? It's late." It's gone. Those days are gone, unfortunately. They're publishing on Wednesdays, still publishing a print product on Wednesdays and on Saturdays. But there's no telling how long that will continue either. But, and that's being published, it's being printed in Detroit Lakes. The press room at Fargo, the downtown building at Fargo, the press room is quiet, deadly quiet, scary quiet. The other day, Steve Stark, who is here, one of the cartoonists I worked with for years, and Trygve Olsen, the other cartoonist, were in to talk about another project we might be working on. And I mentioned how quiet it is in the building because the press isn't running. Those of you who have worked in the building for many years or have been in the building, it was always running. You'd always hear that rumble. You'd always hear that rumble, and you'd always smell that ink and paper, that wonderful ink and paper. I call it an aroma. Other people call it a stench. But through the building, it was gone. So I went down. I said, "You got to see this." So we went down the hall from where my office is and over into the press room and the mail room, where the papers would come off the press and be folded and mailed and bundled for delivery. And went into the press room, turned on the light, and here's this gigantic machine. High as this, the tops of it are about as high as the ceiling, and it goes down. And it's at the time when it was installed and was operational, 1992, 1998, it was the state of the art. There was nothing like it. There was nothing better in printing technology than that machine. And so here it is, not that many years later, and it's quiet in there. I mean, there's not a sound. There's not a sound. There's no gears moving. There's no people moving big, giant rolls of newsprint. So Trygve Olsen gets up on one of the platforms, one of the mid-level platforms, and takes a picture of Steve and me down in the bowels of along the press. I should have brought it. I brought that photo, but it's a remarkable photo. And it's sort of I don't know, in a way it's a sad photo because I can't remember a time when that room was quiet in all the years I was there. So anyway, and the press itself, which is full of this high quality, top-notch grade metals and alloys and whatnot, isn't worth anything. No one wants the presses like that anymore. You can't sell it. They're having a tough time selling it for scrap. The cost of moving out of there is higher than what the thing is worth. So that's what's happened. And all the Forum's presses, and the Forum had, a dozen presses across its system, are in the same situation. There's only a couple that are running. The printing operation up in North Fargo, which is a specialty printing. Detroit Lakes is printing a lot of the newspapers. And there's a printing operation in Sioux Falls that's printing some of the Minnesota properties, newspapers. But the new presses, and these were new presses at Jamestown, Dickinson, Grand Forks, and Duluth, to the scrap heap, if the scrap heap even wants them. So that's the situation. And the book leaves off. The book ends before that happened. So, and it happened so quickly. You know, there's always been change in this, but there's always been change in the newspaper business. I grew up in a newspaper family. My father was a linotype operator on the print side in New Britain, Connecticut, the New Britain Herald, you know, which was a pretty good paper at the time. So I was around newspapers forever, around the production side of it, and then I got into what I did for 30 years. And there was always change. There was always technological changes to make the newspaper better. Color came along, digital photography came along, all those things. But the change that happened in the last 5 to 10 years is unprecedented, not only because of the nature of the change, the technology itself, but the speed of the change and the acceleration of that speed. Nobody knew what they were facing. And we're in a situation still where good managers are still scrambling. We read every day about a newspaper that's shutting its doors. One up in northern Minnesota, the only newspaper in, what's that big county up there, east of Duluth. Anyway, shut down the other day and probably won't be opening. 150-year-old newspaper. And it's gone. So, and we all know stories like that from where we might have been. So it's disturbing for those of us who lived the era that we lived, and that's most of the people in this room. But I don't think it raises an eyebrow for a younger generation, because they're doing this. You know, they're doing this. And no matter what you say, see, I have a message there, and I'm tempted to look at it, but I'm not gonna. And what you say, this is not reliable for information. It just is not. So anyway, so let me read an excerpt or two excerpts from the book that I think sort of set the tone for what it is. This one is from the introduction, and it goes like this. Where did I start that? This book is in part about change, but most importantly, it's about a company's growth and the visionary owners, skilled managers, and loyal employees who work to ensure the long-term viability of a family-owned multimedia business. It's about how they confronted and adapted to economic transitions in the last years of the 20th century and the first years of the 21st. The narrative focuses on an era that began in about the mid-70s and continues to the present day. It is both a unique historical saga and a story of unique individuals. It's about community and business, ethics and standards, family and heritage, success and failure, personalities and myth. So that's kind of the theme that I tried to reach for, because I found, as I did the research, and as some of you folks know, because you have been around the forum a long time, that place attracted a lot of characters. Some of these people attained mythological status for reasons that are really hard to find. And you know, there are great stories that are maybe apocryphal, maybe not. There are stories that I couldn't put in the book because, you know, family book. And but there are great stories of some of these people who fit the mold, fit the caricature of the newsman with the hat and the bottle in the desk, you know, and they, you know, I'm still of the era, and so are some of you who are here, where there was indeed a bottle in every desk, and between shifts, they went to the bars downtown. You know, there was a bar for the pressmen, there was a bar for the circulation people, there was a bar for the newsroom, and then there was the Elks bar for the editors. So, up where the new federal building is now, on that corner. And later in the afternoon, you could find the editors, some of the editors there, most of the editors there, some of the legendary editors that are profiled in the book. Were creatures of their times. They were great newspaper people of their times, but they were they would not fit today at all. They could not survive today at all. But at the time, I was fortunate, having been there for as many years as I was, that I have known and worked with every editor since 1980. Before that, and that's about 5 people, before that, from 1980 going back all the way to the 1920s, there were only 2 editors at the Forum, and they were father and son. H.D. Paulson, Holger Duran Paulson, and his son, JDP, John D. Paulson. What was the D? John, I can't remember what the D was. Anyway, so you had the Paulson dynasty from about from the 60 years, about 60 years of 2 Paulsons. And then after that, starting in 1982 with Joe Dill, some of you might remember Joe Dill, you had about 5 editors. It was interesting. 2 of them died while still working. 2 of them were fired. And the others survived. But so it was fascinating. And our editor now is Matthew Bonpanan, a local guy who grew up in Moorhead, started delivering the paper, and his ambition was, when he went to school to study journalism, he said, I'm going to be editor of the Forum, and he is. And he earned it. I mean, he's been in that newsroom since he was a kid. So it's an interesting tale that you had this Paulson dynasty for all those years, 2 editors for all those years, and then you had a whole slew of editors from 1980 to today. The second excerpt I want to read goes to some of that. Turn in your Bible to chapter 1, page. No. This is the opening of. I used chapter 1 to talk about the attempted hostile takeover of the Forum in the 1980s. A lot of people really didn't know about that, even people who were here. It was covered, it made headlines. I had the privilege, really, of knowing a lot of the people who were involved in it, and had the opportunity to talk to them and to interview some of them. And so I opened this chapter, opened the book pretty much with that story. It goes like this. It could have been lost. In the early 1980s, a contest for ownership of Forum Publishing Company, later to become Forum Communications Company, played out on the front pages of the Fargo, North Dakota newspaper as heirs of the newspaper's 1917 founder and first publisher, Norman B. Black, confronted an attempt by minority shareholders to usurp control of the company. Led by former legendary editor John D. Paulson, the initial legal challenge became bitter and personal. William C. Marsill, who had taken the helm of the company following the unexpected death in 1969 of publisher Norman D. Black, Jr., was not about to see the company wrenched from its family's roots. He had married Jane Black, Norman D. Jr.'s daughter, in 1960 and had worked in several sales and management positions at the Forum before being elected publisher by the board of directors at the age of 33, shortly after his father-in-law's death. 15 years later, he found himself embroiled in a worrisome clash, the outcome of which would determine his future as publisher and president of the corporation's board and ultimately set the stage for the future of the company. I had heard about this situation from Joe Dill because Joe had just come to work. He had just been hired after John D. Paulson was, some would say he retired, but the truth is he was forced out and never forgave Bill Marsill for that. They never got along after that. The rift was permanent. But so I had the opportunity to talk both to, of course, to Bill and Jane, who were involved in that, to Joe, who was around, and to John Paulson, who was still alive and had been banned from the building by Marsill. Banned from the building. This legendary publisher. That's how nasty this situation was. Except on regular business hours, he could come into the Forum and use the library. And he would come, remember, he would come in and snore around and go to the library and stop in and visit with me because I wasn't part of that group, that management group. I wasn't around when all this happened. So he would talk to me, and he said one time, "Well, all right, you're one of the good guys." So okay, well, he was a character. Colburn Lidston here knew him better than I did. He worked with him when he was still editor, right? When he was still in the corner office. But that battle for control of the company was bitter, was extremely expensive for the winners, the Marcil and the Black family. But had they not won, had the family not prevailed and kept the paper in the family, the people who were involved in the coup, the attempted coup, on the Paulson side, were planning, to take the money and run. The Forum during those days was an extremely valuable property. And they wanted to take the money and, sell the place to Gannett or Knight Ridder or whomever, one of the big companies. And had that happened, we would not be here tonight. None of us would have been at the Forum. So it would have been a whole different story altogether. So I devote a chapter to that attempted takeover, and was able to talk with some of the principals who were involved. Not everybody in the Paulson family is happy with the book, because they see it differently. Although they came out wealthy people when it was all over. It's in the book here. In order to make this work, in order to buy out those shareholders that were trying to take over, Bill Marcil and his team, which included Lloyd Case, who had just recently come to work for the company, and I forget who else, but they went to a Chicago bank and they put together a package that would be enough money to buy out the upstart shareholders at was believed to be a fair price. Everything was going quite well, but they were this close to going into a courtroom. There had been several court actions already, and judges issuing all sorts of orders to stop this group and that group from doing one thing or another. The day they were to go to court for the final hearing on a disposition of all this thing, they settled. And the settlement was very generous. The one thing I was not able to get, that they kept close to the vest, was how much. I don't know. Never will. But it was serious enough, and the determination of the family to hold on to the paper, keep it in local hands, was so strong that Bill decided to sell off 2 broadcast properties in Sioux Falls that they'd recently bought, which were developing into very, very strong stations and lucrative stations. They're still there. And of all the when we've interviewed about this, he says the one regret he had was that he had to sell those properties off, because they would have turned out to be very strong members of the Forum, multimedia business. But he did it, and he did it, I think, in sync with what's been the management strategy of the company for as long as I've been aware of how that works, is to retire the debt as soon as possible. And they did. They retired it ahead of schedule. When they bought the last big purchase the company made, the Duluth News Tribune, the Grand Forks Herald, what was the third one? There's a third one. And they bought those in 2007, 2008, just before the downturn in 2008, the economic collapse. And that debt was paid off ahead of schedule. So they know what they're doing. And it was interesting. But some of the personalities that have gone through the building, some of the conflicts that have happened, there's a whole section in here called anecdotes. Colburn is the subject of one of them here with his, this was at his retirement party, and this was, believe it or not. This was a teacher he had at St. James. Yeah. And she was still alive. She came up to his retirement party. He was hardly alive that day. And here she is. I think she's since died, hasn't she? So. Oh, this was St. Michael's Elementary? Grade school. Yeah. So, you know, and this was, what year did you retire? I can't remember. Anyway. Second grade. So, so I thought it would be, and there's also a full chapter on broadcast. DAY Radio will celebrate its 100th birthday in 2022, I think. Yeah, and so there's a whole chapter here on broadcast, DAY radio and television, which is kind of interesting. And as was pointed out to me by a couple of people who were in broadcast, there's a couple of errors in that chapter, but I'm not going to tell you about it. So, but Larry probably would know what they are. But I had great help along the way from the broadcast people, from some of the people in this room. But I was fortunate in that I knew and worked with an awful lot of the people who were able to help me with the history during that period. I mean, I knew them, and part of it I lived too, and so I was able to work that into some of the stories. There's a story when we were the editors and the publisher were taking off in the Forum's plane to go to a meeting in Williston, and and we were taxiing up the runway and taking off, and suddenly the pilot started swearing like he was swearing like most of us in our youth, when we swore a lot, wouldn't use those words. So it was blue. I mean, he was just furious because we wondered what the hell was going on. The plane went woo, and there's all of us are there, the editors from the newsroom, and we look, and he clears by what it looked like 6 inches to a foot. He clears a vehicle that had driven out onto the runway, and it was. The story's in here, and he was a cool guy. He was cool as in cool, relaxed, but he was furious. He banked the plane off. We started off to Williston, and we're all kind of rattled. What the hell? He said, "What's going on? What's going on?" His name was Bill. Bill, what happened? And he turned. He said, "Everybody all right?" "Yeah, we're all right." And he said, "There's some drinks in the cooler back there." "Yeah, thank you." And John Lohman, the late John Lohman, said to him, "Well, what was that all about?" And Bill turned around quietly, looked at us all in the cabin. He says, "I guess that was a near miss." That was it. We flew off. But we found out later that he raised hell when he got back, and heads rolled at the airport because of that incident. There's things like that in there that give it that give the story more life. So many interesting personalities that are in the history of that time. So that's pretty much the story. For me, it was a real challenge, because writing for a daily newspaper, as I did all those years, writing an editorial every day or a column or that sort of thing, it's far different from researching a book and writing it in this form. Far different. So I learned a lot of false starts, a lot of I don't know how many manuscripts would you say, Sandy, and rewrites. So it was a long challenge, an awful lot of rewriting, an awful lot of fact checking, and I had help from one of our copy editors who happens to be here, who read the manuscript for me, made it better, and all those things. So it was a good challenge. It was a lot of fun. I don't know if I'd want to do it again, but here it is. And so if somebody in 50 years from now wants to write another history of the Forum, they have a reference, as I had a reference in Melvin Moline's book. So that's That's the way it happened. And I need to mention, people have commented on how they like the design of the cover of the dust jacket. And I have to credit a fellow named Jim Strom up at Forum Printing in North Fargo. I worked with him on not only the dust jacket, but on the format and the design of the book. A lot of this work is his, the blue bars and that sort of thing. That's his work. And so I just want to give a shout out to Jim Strom, especially for what I think turned out to be a very attractive dust jacket. And there were so many others that helped along the way, and there's some of them right here in the room, and I give them credit in the acknowledgments. And I'm sure I missed some. So we've got some time left for questions or comments or anything you'd like to talk about that refers to the book or to the forum. And there's a microphone coming your way.
There you go. Oh, thank you, Lori. You know, as you talk about that big printing press over there, the age of paper, when we moved to Fargo in '67, the forum hit our doorstep all those years.
It's 1967?
67. 19, not 18. 1967, that's right. And what I was thinking about as you were talking, you know, the reporters, the editors, the publishers, the columnists, they all had a special community prominence. It seems harder to achieve today among the media, among reporters, editors, publishers, columnists like Wayne Lubenow. I mean, it seems like we can't do that anymore. It's almost a watering down of community responsibility because we're missing that. Is that true, or am I misreading that?
Well, I think part of it, Larry, is you talk about people like Wayne, and when I think of some of the people who were with the forum for a long time, it was their career. I mean, some of them are right here. And Wayne was one of those people until he got fired because of the drinking problem he had. You know, this forum sent him, I don't know how many times to try to get dried out, and it didn't work. So he had to leave. But people like him, people like John Lohman or Sib Gullikson, who was the social or the family, what we call the features editor now, for many years. Sports people like the Kolpak clan. The Kolpaks, as mentioned in the book, A. Kolpak has been writing sports in that room for more than 60 years, longer than the Paulsons were editors, going back to Ed Kolpak and Dave and Jeff now, who is the dean of Bison sports writing. You don't have a lot of that anymore in the media, especially in broadcast where you were for a while. They come and go. The turnover in the newsroom toward the few last years when I was there was becoming that way. So you have, I mean, it's always been that way. There's always been churn, but there was always a core, and the core was usually larger than the orbit around it that was, you know, coming and going. Kathy Toffelmeyer, how many years, Kathy, were you there? 18 years. You know, and Colburn, you know, I mean, I think Colburn had a chance to, cover a couple of Civil War battles, and passed it up because travel was bad during those times. So, and Bruce was on board for how many years, Bruce? 32 years. So, and I was there for 30. And Steve was with the forum in one capacity or another. How many years, Steve? I don't know, a bunch of years. So you don't have that large a core of stability. There are a few there now. And so if you don't have that, you don't have the community connection. You're not invested in the community the same way. Your kids aren't going to school in the community. You're planning not to stay. You know, you're planning to be elsewhere in 5 years maybe, or sometimes sooner than that. So that, I think, weakens the bond of community that a local newspaper really has to have in order to do its job right. The Forum newsroom, even with the changes, there are more people there now than there were 10, 15 years ago. They've been adding to the staff that develops content. They develop it differently because a lot of it's for online. But there still is a core, and I see these people, when I have an office down there, and I see these people almost every day. And there's I don't know, maybe 20, 25 who have some longevity in the place and are committed to the place and committed to the job, to the craft. And so it's different. It's different, but it's not completely lost. It's not completely lost. The problem is, I think, is the way news and information, advertising, all of it that newspapers used to do is distributed now and is consumed now is not, exclusive to the daily newspaper. In fact, the daily newspaper is maybe becoming the least important factor in that process. And that changes this cohesion, this identity that a community has when it's seeing its daily newspaper, on its porch in the mailbox every morning. So all that changes. I mean, you all know in your families people who don't read newspapers in any form. They just don't. And there's a loss there. The online products are good. I don't know if you're familiar with the e-paper that they're doing. It's, the Forum does it, other newspapers are doing. The Forum's e-paper is really a nice product. It's clean and it's well done. It's well reported. It's the good reporters are doing their work. The news hole is huge. There's more in it than there would be in the print edition because there's no limits because it's online. So, and from what I hear from the people involved in that, more and more people are accessing the e-paper every day. It's getting very popular because it's kind of this bridge between, it looks like the newspaper on your screen. It's kind of this bridge. It's not just a website. So it's there still is this connection to the print product because it looks like the print product on screen. And it's easy to access. You can turn the pages electronically. You can blow up, if you've got an eye problem, you can blow up the print and all that sort of thing. That's probably going to be one of the most successful technological innovations is things like the e-paper. On the other hand, the people like me, I come in the morning and I call up the e-paper, bloop, and there it is. And then I look at it, and then I hit print. I hit print. And I print the e-paper on the large format printer in advertising. And I walk up the stairs and I go to the printer. By the time I get there, I've got my morning newspaper. I should have brought one. All printed out in almost the same size as the newspaper used to get on the doorstep. I staple it together. And I open it and I read it with my coffee and poisonous donut or whatever I'm eating. And so I have my morning newspaper, but not everybody has a large format printer in their house, Thank you, Toshiba. but I can't break the habit of having that paper newspaper in the morning. But I'm a dinosaur, as most of us here are. and so there's no, that's nice that I'm able to do that, but it's sort of holding on to something that's going away. And for me, that's hard. Ted, yeah.
Forum is a media, multimedia, and how far back it acquired TV and radio. But they basically have just gotten rid of the radio. Can you talk about that, or what that has in their whole philosophy of running a media company, or that they figure AM radio is out?
You got to make money. You got to make a buck to keep the doors open. That's the reality of it. They didn't sell radio. They're in a management arrangement with this other group. They still own DAY, but right now it's a management agreement with an option sometime down the line to buy, maybe, if it all works out. They're not involved in content, though. They're not involved in anything that's on the air. This company that is doing that is the company that is involved in the management agreement. But the assets of radio, the equipment, the building, all that stuff, and the name and the logo, the DAY call letters and the licensing, that's still owned by Forum Communications.
Could you also comment why you thought old-time editors wouldn't make it today? What their defects would be?
Yeah, I think that even as the man I hold as a standard for the editor that I admired the most and learned from the most was Joe Dill, and most of you knew Joe. He died on the job just a year or so before he was getting ready to retire, and but Joe got his training with the Associated Press, and there's a whole section about the editors, and he's in that section. The changes that editors like Joe and a couple of them after him and those before him experienced were not major technological changes, major structural changes, or the economic model changing as it has. They were the kind of changes you can work with. But if you grew up as strictly a print journalist, and most of these people did, strictly a print journalist, it was even difficult when we tried to work more with broadcast. We tried to use TV and radio. There was great resistance to that on both ends, both on the print end and the broadcast end. So not only was there, I think, an inability of people of that era, there would have been to adjust to what's happening now. There was a resistance to it also. I think the Forum was quite fortunate and smart to name Matt von Panan editor when it did. 10 years ago now, 11 years ago, something like that, maybe a little more. Because Matt was only 31 or 32 when he became editor and was ready for the change that happened and has adapted well. Some people don't like the way he's done it. That comes with the territory. I mean, you're editor of the major paper in the area. You're going to have people who don't like what you do. But he was young enough and unafraid, really, not intimidated by the technology, so that he was able to move into it and actually help the transition with the newsroom, because there were people in the newsroom, older reporters and whatnot, who didn't want anything to do with it, but they had to. And now, of course, everybody's on board now. So I think it was generational. It was generational resistance. So, not that they weren't smart enough, but it just wasn't what they wanted to do. So. Ted here is an interesting story. Ted and I got to know each other a few years ago. At the symphony, I think, wasn't it? Somewhere? Or at the library, maybe? I don't remember where. And we started talking, and we find out that we're both from Connecticut, and we're both about the same age. And what the hell, really? He says, where are you from in Connecticut? He said, West Hartford. And really? He says, I'm from New Britain. Oh, New Britain. They're just a few miles apart. And he said, where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to school? And what'd you do in school? Da-da-da-da-da. Come to find out that Ted was, a fairly good runner on the track team. And I was on the track team in my high school. And unbeknownst until how many years ago, we probably ran against each other in meets in Connecticut. Small world. So. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I was just going to mention, I believe it's Ely, Minnesota newspaper that recently closed.
Say that again?
I believe it's the Ely, Minnesota newspaper that recently
Is
closed.
that Coochin County? Is that it?
I'm not certain.
I'm not sure, but it's that county, I think, yeah. And you had one up in Walhalla, North Dakota last year, the year before, shut down. They're just, especially the smaller papers and smaller markets that depend so heavily on every dime from their advertisers and their subscribers. Those papers are in trouble. We're seeing it around North Dakota, rural Minnesota, everywhere. And we're seeing it in the daily press. You're seeing major daily papers shut their doors. So, yeah.
Let me get a mic. Sorry.
I've just had a thought that occasionally I've talked to communication students over at Morehead State and talked about public relations and so forth. But what do you tell journalism students today, Jack, when you go out there and talk to young people today in journalism? What do you tell them about the future?
Well, Larry, to be quite honest with you, I've quit doing that. I used to do that pretty often. I teach over at Concordia or up at NDSU, sometime at Morehead State when, I forget who was over there. He's gone now. He's since died. Anyway, but there are no departments of journalism anymore. There are no journalism schools. There are schools of communication, which could mean anything they want it to mean. And in order to teach modern communications, you have to teach the technology. You just have to. All the technology has moved the production process into the newsroom and into this or into the computer. All those production facilities, the big machines, the linotype operators, the electronic stuff, all the things that were in the back shop of papers like the Forum and others, all those things are gone. Our back shops are occupied by people sitting in front of computers, generating stuff that way. So journalism, the act of covering a story, getting the facts as straight as you can, working with sources, working with editors, and writing it up to make sure it's accurate, is not necessarily the core function of the journalist. They're doing so many other things. It's phenomenal. So I wouldn't know what to tell them because, I don't know what the hell they're doing. They get it out. They get the paper out. The stuff is good. I think the reporting is very good. And older reporters that I've known for years, Patrick Springer, Dave Olson, pick some that you see the bylines, are still doing the work they did when they were strictly print reporters. They're still doing good, basic nuts and bolts journalism. And there's a core of those people that are still at it. But they're eager to retire. They make no secret of it. Can't wait to get out of here, that kind of thing. So for me to try and tell students, what journalism should be, it's almost as if they're going to have to tell me, because the principles should be the same. The principles of reporting and writing and the ethical standards should be the same. I think for most people they are, but sometimes the pressure of the technology, the pressure of the 24-hour cycle erodes those standards. Not consciously. People aren't trying to cut corners. They're forced into situations where they cut corners because we got to get that out. We got to get that out right now. We got to get that online right now. So a story that may need a couple of layers of editing, a couple more eyes on it, doesn't get that treatment. And that's a problem. That's a mistake. And then there are the other sources. You have an audience out there that's not the same audience that it was, that depended upon, when you had three very reliable networks, national networks reporting the news. There's no more Walter Cronkites there. And now you have this divided, this fractured picture out there where people pick the news that makes them happy, not the news that is honest. So, I don't know. If I were advising a young person, and I've got grandkids who I'll probably advise about what to do, I would not advise them to go into journalism. I wouldn't do it. And, you know, it's too bad. It's too bad.
Yeah, Jack, something happened to my wife and I today that just reinforces what you're saying.
My wife and me. Something happened to my wife and me.
You're absolutely correct. But my mother was an English teacher and she just didn't get through it. Anyway, we're coming back from the West Acres area and a police car goes by with lights on and we pull over to the side. And then in the course of heading to our north side residence, 6 more police cars go by us. And it's shortly after 12. So I say to Jackie, let's turn around and find out what's going on. And we think of young people with technology. Well, this 80-year-old woman says to me, nah, let's just go home. We'll check on the Inform in an hour. So that's what it's all about, really.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, Bruce.
Would you say who is owning papers has got any thing to do with how journalism is the slings and arrows of journalism? For example, I won't name the paper, but basically a very respected paper just got purchased by a hedge fund.
Who's that?
Chicago Tribune got purchased by a hedge fund.
Yeah.
And could you speak to how that may or may not affect how the journalism product advances?
Well, you know, it's hard to say. I think that's a mixed picture. I think you have some owners who might not be traditional media people or newspaper people will buy a newspaper and make it better. I think that's happened at the Washington Post. So you do have that. Warren Buffett bought a bunch of papers. He bought the Omaha World Tribune. That's the biggest one he bought, and he bought some others. And he's certainly not a newspaper guy. You know, he's an investor, railroad, everything else. And from what I understand, he's running these papers as newspapers. Others are, as you said, I think it was it St. Louis or Denver? Somebody, a hedge fund, and pretty much gutted it, you know, and started laying people off, shutting down departments, and reducing the impact of the paper. Paper I'm familiar with, the paper that has the distinction of being the oldest newspaper in the country that's been published daily. That's the Hartford Courant in Connecticut. Great paper. Closed their newsroom. They closed the newsroom. They didn't stop publishing, but they closed the newsroom. So you wonder what that means for the future. But, you know, before I came to Fargo, we were at Devil's Lake. And the paper up there, when I started with the paper up there in the 1969, it was owned by the Graham family and had been for 3 or 4 generations. And they ran a good daily newspaper, 5 days a week. And it was a strong newspaper. Our circulation was strong and it was going up. Well, the family wasn't able to keep their act together. And so there was not a generation to take over the paper. So they sold it to a company called Park Communications. And Park Communications, owned by a fellow named Roy Park, who made his fortune with, you ready for this? Duncan Hines cakes. He financed Duncan Hines because Duncan Hines had the recipe, and so he financed the Duncan Hines empire and made, you know, so much money it's hard to believe on the Duncan Hines brand. And then decided he wanted to start buying newspapers. And he started buying small newspapers throughout the country. He had Bemidji for a while. He had papers in Montana, South Dakota, and the Devil's Lake paper. He bought the Devil's Lake paper in North Dakota. And I was still working. We're still working there. And then they decided that they wanted to name me general manager. So my title changed from editor to editor and general manager. And all they wanted me to do was find a way to cut the staff, especially the people who had been there for a while who were making a good salary. That was my order. cut the staff. And okay, well, and I would make a pilgrimage to one of our local banks every, I don't know, couple of times a week. And I would send thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to banks in Ithaca, New York, and Raleigh, North Carolina, which was where the Park Empire had their banking done. If that money had been able to stay in the community, like it was when the family owned the paper, I'd have been able to keep all those people hired more. But they were sucking it dry. And you look at that paper now, you wouldn't want to be associated with it. Local ownership really is a big deal. It really is. And not that all local owners are, saintly or anything like that. But when you see a commitment, a long-term generational commitment to local ownership, there's something more there than just making a buck. Not that they don't make a buck, they do. But when it becomes just that, when it becomes just a source of revenue for, a bank in Ithaca, New York, or a bank account in Ithaca, New York, that's a different model altogether. And that's what I experienced up at Devil's Lake. So when the opportunity came down here, when I got the opportunity to come down here, I was here. So that was that. Anything else? I think we're pretty close to our limit. So, well, thanks. Thank you all very much. This was fun. Good to see some of you folks.
All right. Thank you all for coming out in person. And of course, those folks online, we're happy to have them with us as well. And hopefully we'll see you at the library sometime soon. We have 3 locations. We'll also be out in the community this summer with our book bike and at other community events. So good night, everyone.